นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมัสสามิ Blessings, good evening, or good morning, depending. This weekend we've been celebrating in the monastery the New Year, which is celebrated by many of the Southeast Asian Theravada Buddhist communities. In Thailand it's called Songkran, often associated with water festival. But it's the New Year time for many people, many cultures in that area. And that usually means people coming back to see family, taking a holiday, parents, grandparents coming together, and also going to monasteries, temples, because like New Year, Chinese New Year, Western New Year time tends to be a time where you think of those people who have helped you in your life. Family, number one, parents, but extended families, and also teachers, living teachers, and then our greatest teacher, the Buddha. It's a time where we often express gratitude and appreciation to those who have helped us, recognizing that we are not here alone in the world. People have brought us up, people have helped us, given us material support and love and knowledge to get to where we are now. So it's a time where people express that. So in Thailand we have what they call the water festival or water ceremony, where one takes water and bathes the hands of elders in the family and in the community, and particularly teachers. So at the monastery today we had the water ceremony, bathing first of all the Buddha statue, just symbolic, representing the Buddha, and then the monks. The water symbolizes the kindness, the compassion in our heart, and also the gratitude in our hearts. See, these very skillful qualities that come up when we're more peaceful, when we take a moment to pause and think about life. And these qualities come up. But sometimes it's useful to have rituals and ceremonies and events just to formally bring our minds to pay attention to these qualities, because they're so skillful, spiritual qualities. And they bring people together, bring up a sense of harmony, kindness between people, not just family, but people with shared backgrounds, shared interests, such as in a monastery, people who make use of the monastery, whether it's the resident community or the support community, the lay people or the laity who come to the monastery. It's a day when people come together in harmony to show mutual support, recognition, kindness, compassion, and so on. So even though these events can sometimes seem repetitive because they go on every year, and sometimes people lose track of what it's all about, and that's the trouble with rituals. Sometimes people forget what the purpose of it is. When you do take a moment to pause, consider what it's for, why, then it can be a useful time. Another part of the ritual is the ritual of asking forgiveness, and that's also important because when we do come together as a group, maybe stuff percolates up into our minds, our hearts. So as we all know, when families come together on New Year, children remember things that their parents have said and done, parents remember things that children have said and done, siblings, extended family members, and even friends often remember stuff. It comes up into the mind, what we call perceptions, memories, perceptions come up, and some of them are more negative than others. Some are good, luckily, and then we bring up the wholesome, skillful perceptions of appreciation, gratitude, kindness. But sometimes we have the more negative ones. What he said, what she said, what he did, what she did. And so when we come together, that's something we have to deal with. So in the Thai tradition, we have a ceremony of asking forgiveness. And you can do this at home with family members as well as in the monastery, where you recite a verse in your own language or in the Pali language, and you recite a verse requesting forgiveness from teachers, which is what people do with monks. And the teacher acknowledges that, gives forgiveness, and also asks the student to forgive the teacher. So it's a two-way thing between teachers and students, parents and children, and so on. And we say, I forgive you as you should forgive me, because forgiveness is that clearing of the air so that we can move on, carry on, and not dwell too much on the past. When you forgive someone for their wrongdoing, whether it's intentional or sometimes it's unintentional, accidental, whether you know what they've done or they know what they've done, or whether they don't know what they've done or you don't really know what they've done, we do it anyway, as a kind of, both as a healing practice and also as a preventative, just in case we did something and we didn't realize that we did it. It can have good effects on many levels. But the idea is you're not expecting to wipe out memories from the past, because part of the function of the human mind is we remember stuff. We absorb memories, good and bad. Information, some more neutral, but also some sense impressions that we associate with unpleasant feeling, unpleasant perceptions, and those can keep coming up over and over again. Just as the pleasant ones keep coming up. But if we don't establish some mindfulness and understanding of what's going on, we might not realize how we're affected by these perceptions we've attached to, identified with in a very personal way, as self, as me, my memory, my experience. And so we can keep experiencing pain over and over again if we don't find a skillful way to become more mindful, acknowledge and let go of some of these painful ones. The pleasant ones can be a problem as well, because that can also contribute to disappointment. Maybe you have a pleasant memory about a person or a place and it comes up, but you don't get the same pleasure each time maybe. Or people change, things change, places change. You go somewhere, enjoy yourself in one place, and then 10 years later you go back and you're hoping for the same pleasure and it doesn't happen because conditions have changed. So even pleasant memories can trigger some disappointment or suffering. More importantly, or probably more of immediate importance, is the painful or unpleasant memories and perceptions triggered when we meet each other, like at New Year's time. But as Buddhists practicing the Buddhist path, we're learning and coming to understand from these things. So when we do meet people who bring up strong perceptions maybe of anguish attached to our view of that person or whatever they bring with them when we think of them or see them, meet them. That's where we have to practice, isn't it? Whoever you are in life, if you're following or in line with the Buddhist teachings, your aim is to reduce and finish suffering, because nobody likes suffering. But in order to reduce our suffering, end our suffering, get rid of suffering, we have to understand, well, where does it come from? What's going on? And that's why these rituals and ceremonies, say at Thai New Year or other times, can be quite useful, because they remind us what we're doing. We are practicing forgiveness, and that's not always easy. The more you attach to a memory, an unpleasant feeling associated with that memory or that perception, the more you suffer. And if we don't establish some mindfulness and understanding and wisdom around this, well, the whole process can keep going on day by day, year by year, and maybe intensify. And this is something you learn in meditation, isn't it? As you learn to bring your attention back to your body and your mind, what we call the 5 khandhas, and you get better at doing that, observing yourself, this body, this mind, from a place of detached awareness, rather than always just reacting to everything. You realize that there's a lot of unnecessary suffering we experience simply because we don't treat this body and mind and the thoughts and memories and feelings we experience with wisdom. We just identify and hold on. As you identify and hold on with painful feelings, painful perceptions, thoughts that come from and trigger more negativity and negative emotions, you suffer. But we can turn this around and use it as a way to learn. Why do I feel anger, say, when I meet Uncle Jim, Auntie Dora, whoever they are, whatever their names are, no offence to Jims and Doras. When you meet someone and they trigger a painful feeling, perhaps, even if you don't meet them in person, when you just think of them, why is that? Where's that coming from? So the Buddha gave us this teaching about cause and effect, how these 5 khandhas, this body and mind, split up into the 5 khandhas just for convenience, are a basis for suffering when we attach with a sense of self. Where does this sense of self come from? You could say it's a bad habit that we've picked up that we're not very aware of. But when we begin practicing meditation, improving mindfulness, learning to reflect on our experience, maybe we start to see what's going on more clearly. And ideally, before you have your meeting with your family or your Buddhist friends at the New Year festival or whatever, you establish mindfulness. Of course, that might be asking a lot, but sometimes we can do it, or certainly we can do some meditation. Before you go to the temple, before you go to the family reunion, do some meditation, establish some mindfulness. Because the whole purpose of practicing mindfulness, meditation, listening to the Dhamma is to try and understand better where this suffering comes from. You might notice when you practice more mindfulness, you're a little sharper, clearer in your mind. You notice how things trigger reactions, don't they? You see Uncle Jim or Auntie, whoever, just seeing them, the memories start to filter up into your consciousness at that point. And sometimes it's very fast, there's not a lot you can do, but sometimes it's slower, and you may notice how seeing somebody, hearing their voice, or sometimes it's just an internal memory. It comes up, and with it, there's some feeling of tension in the body. You know, if you've previously been practicing mindfulness, you're a regular meditator, say, you might be able to do that, to catch the feeling, the emotion as it's arising as you walk into the room with uncle or auntie or brother or sister, or as you're letting your mind daydream and go to thoughts about uncle, auntie, brother, sister, whoever. You may catch how the whole process is being maintained, firstly by a lack of awareness, a lack of understanding, and then habits that we fall into. So there's the feeling that arises as you see the person. And if that feeling is more unpleasant, tense, or even sometimes painful, well, it triggers a reaction. Again, if we're not so mindful, that reaction will be negative thoughts, may manifest in your body as well. Like when you're tense, you clench your fists, clench your teeth, you feel the tension in your body. If you're doing something, maybe even affects how you act at that moment. So when you're more angry or have an unpleasant feeling arise because of some kind of angry memory about a person, you may stomp your feet or slam your plate down, put your thing down with more firmness than usual, perhaps. That may be something you can notice in your behavior. Now picking up with your mindfulness how you're in a situation and anger arises in your heart, and then in your actions it's expressed, maybe in your speech. So as you become angry in the body and in the mind, then thought formations lead you to say things reflecting that state of mind that's arisen. So you meet Uncle Bob, Auntie Dora, whoever it may be, and maybe you're doing your best to be polite, and you look at them, smile, grit your teeth. And as you grit your teeth, the tension in your body and mind is exposed, and if depending on uncle or auntie how sharp they are, they might pick it up or maybe they won't. And maybe it's for you to manage. And the hello comes out, but it comes out through gritted teeth. That's something you can notice all the time, isn't it? Or if you're a Thai Buddhist, maybe it's you give your Anjali. Our Thai Buddhists meet like that at New Year, but there'll be the people you give a real 100% Anjali because of the goodwill and the good perceptions coming up, and the good feelings you're experiencing. And there may be that one person that the Anjali is only half there, or it's quick, it's the speed Anjali, you go up quickly and then take it away. Or the classic is taking one finger down in the Anjali salute to this person, and one finger down means I still don't accept you, I still don't forgive you. But what's happening here? You're having a memory, a perception about maybe a person you don't like, feelings of tension, and if it's very fast, then maybe it's coming out in your speech, your conduct, or at the very least in trains of thought, isn't it? Negative trains of thought. Even when you're meditating, even if you're on a meditation retreat where you're hardly talking or doing anything with anyone, these emotions, these perceptions can come up quite strongly. When I teach meditation retreats, people come and tell me how much suffering they had when all they were doing was sitting there, but the memories come up and trigger sadness or aversion or worry. And it's nothing happening in the meditation room as such, it's just memories and perceptions coming up. And this is a big part of our meditation practice, learning how to deal with perceptions, old memories as they come up, how to deal with them skillfully. And if it's something like anger, well, to be in touch with that, to be mindful enough to see the feeling that's triggered, or know the feeling that's triggered, know the thought formations, know the mental state that's coming up, but to keep watching, keep observing, even if you can't stop it arising, but to observe what happens when it arises. And there may be a moment of anguish or unhappiness, disappointment. But if you keep watching, it passes away, doesn't it? And your mind goes back to at least a moment of quietness. And you might have enough mindfulness to catch that angry feeling, angry perception, angry memory that's associated with some kind of pain, suffering, and instead of always reacting in the same old way, now you maybe can let it go. You gain a little victory and a little insight into the impermanence and the not-self nature of feelings and thoughts and perceptions, what we call the 5 khandhas. Sometimes it's harder, sometimes it's easier. Some things we can let go of easily, some things we can see as impermanent easily. Sometimes we can't, and we just get stuck, get things fixed in our mind, even though they're not fixed, but we believe them to be fixed, so we just get stuck into our little story that the mind throws up, and we don't have enough mindfulness to separate our awareness from it, so we just believe it and get stuck into it until awareness returns, maybe a long way from now, sometimes. If you keep practicing this, I mean, what are you teaching yourself? What are you learning? Well, you're learning to see the impermanent nature of mental impressions that impinge on this mind, what we call the citta, that which knows. I just given an example of meeting uncle or auntie and getting caught into perceptions of pleasure or displeasure, maybe. The process is going on all the time, over and over again. It's what we call samsara. Literally, it's what keeps the world going round. They say money keeps the world going round. I would say mental defilements keep the world going round. Mental defilements, these qualities rooted in ignorance, avijja, conditions, craving and attachment, greed, anger, delusion, in all its forms, keep the mind spinning in a negative way, keep the stories forming, keep the negative emotions coming up, keep the perceptions causing suffering, I like this, don't like that, until our practice improves and we start to improve our level of mindfulness, and then from there understanding of what's going on, and we can see how we are grasping, we're craving, we're attaching and grasping at perceptions and thoughts and feelings as self. But now with our improved mindfulness and insight, maybe have those moments where we let go. Don't identify so strongly with those impressions and just see them as mental impressions, a sight, a sound, a thought, a feeling. Much of the Dhamma that I teach and other teachers I know and respect teach, often it's very repetitive and samey, because the aim of what we're doing is not to find the most interesting insights into the Dhamma or really new knowledge of the Dhamma. It's all rehashing other ways of expressing the Dhamma and explaining things. But it's more to keep reminding people of the Dhamma practice and the way of practice so that they keep practicing. And as you keep practicing, you keep listening to the Dhamma, associating with fellow practitioners, getting good inputs from others, well, little by little your mind does start to pick up on things more. You observe things more and you see mental defilements more clearly than before. If you really see or know mental defilements as mental defilements, you know their defiling quality, that's when you begin to abandon them. That's what we call wisdom, where you see greed as a defiling quality that only spins the mind into more agitation, more suffering, more discontent, anguish the same, delusion the same. That's why we talk about mental defilement so much. We're just reminding people what is the root cause of our suffering. You have to look back at the mind itself to see that, to know that. Otherwise we're forever sort of working with just the superficial appearance of things, and that's important on one level, but if you really want to change your heart for the better, change your whole experience of life for the better and improve, which is what the Buddha pointed out you can do, then you have to look more deeply. Really get to know yourself better and develop this sense of equanimity, detached awareness, rather than always getting lost in your reactions of pleasure and pain, liking and disliking. People are always asking, why is the world the way it is? When is the world going to be peaceful and happy? And when will human beings treat each other better? Well, there are actually a lot of human beings treating each other pretty well. Certainly not. The world is not without that. But they ask also, well, why do the horrible things happen? Why do people kill each other? Why do individuals go on rampage killing others? Why do we have wars and conflicts? Why do groups of people attack each other? We're looking into that when we look into our own heart through meditation. We're looking down at the real root cause of it all, which is ignorance, unawareness, conditioning, craving and attachment, which brings up this sense of self. The technical words ditthi and mana. Ditthi is self-view, mana, conceit. So if you're always attaching to negative thoughts about yourself, about the world, that becomes who you are, doesn't it? That becomes the strongest conditioning force in your consciousness, your citta. The people asking, they say, why can someone run around a shopping mall on a Saturday afternoon killing other people? Well, we may not know exactly the details of that person's life, but you can see the tendencies, isn't it? If somebody keeps falling into very negative views and thinking, and they don't have much positive inputs in their life, they don't develop much kindness, compassion, mindfulness, then that becomes the sort of base level of their mind. Just angry to the point where it just bubbles out, overflows, boils over. And they may do something very cruel, very unkind without realizing, without knowing what they're doing, not knowing the consequences. Why do we make bad karma in life? Because we don't see the consequences of our actions. We're just stuck in these reactions of unpleasant feeling, negative thinking, and it just affects our actions over and over again. Whereas what we're doing here, learning meditation, learning to understand the mind better, is reversing the process. One thing to remember, like many people say, oh, this meditation, you're learning meditation, it's so difficult, changing the mind, changing the way I think, the way I react to things. Well, at first it does seem like that, because you are kind of putting your mind into reverse, spinning the mind in a better way, the way of the Dhamma, rather than following the way of greed, anger and delusion. That takes effort, doesn't it? It's like if you put a wheel in motion, and the Buddha compared the Dhamma to a wheel. If your wheel is going in one direction, to stop it and then get it turned and going back the other way, at first that can take a bit of effort. You can't do it just like that. Even if you're in a car, saying you want to do a U-turn, turn around to go back another way, you have to stop, turn. There's a lot of effort in turning the steering wheel, stopping and putting the brakes on, changing gear, whatever, and then you turn. And then once you start in the new direction, well, things get better. It's easier. Training this mind is much the same. As you start developing mindfulness and some insight and wisdom, it seems quite hard work, and sometimes we get disappointed, frustrated with it, and want to give up. So many people ask me, they say, "Oh, how do you deal with the thought, I just want to give up, can't meditate anymore, can't practice the Dhamma anymore, it's too hard." Well, it is a feeling that will come up, of course, but you have to be very patient with that, and then trust that when you start the process, giving the right nudge, the right inputs, like listening to the Dhamma, spending some time with Kalyana Mitta, and then putting effort into some meditation and practice and reflecting on your experience, then you can turn things around. And that Dhamma wheel that you put into motion, once you start practicing again, if you've stopped, or if it's the very first time, once you start practicing, well, wheels gain momentum, don't they? So it does get easier the longer, the more you do it. Just as it gets easier to go the way of delusion, the more you do it, the more you follow those negative thoughts, greed, anger, delusion, the more you let the mental defilements rule your mind, take over your mind, the easier it is for them to do that. So, the more you let yourself give into anger, the more you will become angry, and more often you'll become angry. And the more you attach to things, worry, fear, desires, greed and desire, the more you do that, the easier it is to follow that way. But similarly, the way of Dhamma, the way of generosity, kindness, mindfulness, compassion, wisdom, wise reflection, that way also gets easier the more you do it. The wheel turns more easily once it's set in motion. All you need to do is just push a little bit and it will keep going, isn't it? Like a car, once you start a car, the weight of the car keeps it rolling. You still need an engine, but it will roll for quite a long time on itself, by itself. Or like that game, I don't think anyone plays this game anymore in the world, but in the old days you'd get a wheel, an old bicycle wheel or a car tire, and you get a stick and you set the wheel rolling, and you just need to tap it with your stick and it will keep going. And one tiny little tap will keep a wheel going. Dhamma practice is like that. Even though it's hard to get the wheel upright to start with, you need a push. But once it's turning, then you just tap, 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 and it keeps going. That's what we're aiming for. That's like changing the cycle, the habits of the mind. So, the painful memory, the painful feeling comes up, but you give it a tap, meaning you give it a nudge with mindfulness and some insight, backed up by a bit of patience and compassion, and you can let it go. You don't have to keep holding on, identifying with that, creating a self out of it. You just know, another painful memory, let that go. And you let it go. And it gets easier the more you do it. This is how they describe Dhamma practice, isn't it? Why did the Buddha talk about stream enterers, once returners, non-returners, arahants? A stream enterer is like someone who's got that wheel rolling to the point where it's not going to stop. They still have to make a bit of effort. They still use their little stick, tap the wheel, keep it going for a while. But eventually it's just rolling all by itself. That's the mind going in the right direction, spinning in the right direction. So instead of churning up more kilesas, the kilesas are disappearing. The delusion is disappearing. So the hardest part of meditation or practicing the Buddhist teachings is the beginning, getting to start. It's getting your wheel up and running. But once it's running, it's actually easier to keep it going. So maybe I'll leave you with those reflections tonight, and for the last part of the session, if you have any questions, can do our best to answer them.